through the survey first. So just for an overview, here's the information of who participated. So we had about 110 participants, and they were an average age of 45 years old. So you can kind of see by range of the age here, we have some in teens and 20s. Most people were in the 35 to 44 age range. And then we have people 45 to 55 and 55 to 65 and up as well. So you can kind of see that there's a peak. And this, I myself am 39, and this may have impacted my reach of who responded as well. So keep that in mind. And here we go. We have the breakdown by gender. So we have about 37% of participants identified as female, 56% as male, 4.5%, almost 5% as non-binary. Ethnicity by percentage, we had a 72% white and 8% multiracial, 7% Black, 5% Latino, and you can see these other categories here as well. This is actually similar to the response of the survey conducted by the AFM in 2019, I believe, which had a respondent rate of about 70% white of participants. And here we have the income bracket. So approximate average annual income from music work of New York jazz musicians in 2019. Here's the exciting, I'm just gonna zoom in. So you can see the average income, oh, sorry about that. The average income is about $27,000 a year, with a standard deviation of 18,000, which means that you can go up from that point from 27. So there's a range upwards and a range downwards, but you can see how this breakdown is. So it's kind of fairly evenly across these income brackets. And so most people are in this range here, most commonly 26 to 40K. And the averages of all of these breakdowns sort of evens out to 27,000 a year. Okay, and this was in 2019. This is before the pandemic. So the next question was, how much did musicians make in 2020? And you can see that this number went down to about 13,000 a year. So that was sliced in half. And you can see the breakdown here. I even designed it so that you could see kind of more details about if you made less than 5K from music work in 2020, most people made less than 1,000. Of course, the pandemic impacted everybody's ability to perform and teach. So, and by the way, it's not fun to have these depressing statistics, but here we are. So this, you can kind of just, get kind of a read on this. And so keep in mind, since then, I think in order to secure housing in New York, you need to make 40 times the rent, right? Which means for a rent, the standard market rate, I think for a 1-bedroom apartment now is at least 3,000, or it might be maybe 2,500 or something. But if you think 3,000 times 40, that's, this is very unsustainable for musicians doing this type of work. But I do want to say, as we know, New York also has many social programs that make it possible for musicians and artists to exist. But the whole purpose of this is to really shed light on the difficulties and the exact fiscal and psychological difficulties. So since then, let's see, the survey was conducted in 2021. And of course, there needs to be further research on what income, how income has happened since each year. So has it gone up? Has it gone down? How is virtual online classes impacted possibilities and all these sorts of things? So, okay, so let's keep going. So I actually surveyed people on unemployment, and you could see that about 60% received unemployment and almost 40% did not receive unemployment. And of this category, we had about almost 35% didn't apply. So you might, that might suggest that a population is so used to being disenfranchised that they don't even apply for support that might be accessible. There are also people who submitted their answer to this and noted that they had some issue or they were afraid that their visa might expire if they applied for unemployment with the state, or for example here, received but stopped filing because of future immigration concerns. They weren't a US citizen, so they qualified, but they you know, had an issue regarding immigration concerns to keep receiving unemployment. So just to, yeah, and I'm curious about your thoughts on this as well. So, okay, keep going here. You can kind of see this. This is the same graph, but the color scheme is a little less rude. Okay, so I'll just keep going here. All right, so the next section we have engagement with music. So examining the types of musicians, the genres, the instruments people play, and their working activities. So here we go. This is kind of fun. So types of gigs that people are primarily working. We have jazz is the largest category, and I aim to capture people practicing jazz practices. We also have a large free improv avant-garde, numbers of people. We also have rock, punk, and hardcore at a third largest category. And then we have traditional and world music, as well as pop, soul, hip hop, R&B, Broadway musical theater. And you know, keep in mind that this is like the live active gigs that people are working on. So this is how they filled out the boxes, not maybe how they identify as a musician or something like this. And then we have this other category, which was about 14%. And literally when people filled out the other submissions, everybody had like a very, very specific description of the exact type of music they did, and it all varied. So this is kind of a big mishmash. So everybody was clearly, didn't want to check the boxes or be defined by boxes, which, makes a lot of sense because, surveys, how can they really capture us? So that's just sort of the breakdown of the gigs. And now we have, it was funny. Like I was very, I appreciated everybody that took the survey. Okay, so especially on that question. Okay, so here we go. So participants by instrument, we have almost half are rhythm section players, 25% are horn players, about more than 10% vocalists, spoken word or freestyle artists, maybe poets, maybe etc. Then we have electronics, audio engineer, computer processing people as well, other instruments, and other also as well, 10%. So that's just kind of the breakdown of what we're looking at in the landscape, which is kind of interesting. So, all right, so primary role in music work, we have side musician, largest category, 46 participants out of 100, I think it was 110. Check the box says side musician performer. And then we have a also large category, 39%, close second, who identified as band leader, performer, feature artist. And so then we have people who primarily identified as teachers, educators, or teaching artists. And then we had about 5% identifying primarily as composers, arrangers, or orchestrators, and 7% identifying other work as a primary role in what they do. So you might infer that, you know, everybody is a side musician and everybody is a band leader, as there were so many who ticked both of those categories, and those are the largest turnouts. You know, you might imagine how many band leaders are there per side musicians. And in my experience personally, it's always been, I've supported other artists, and I've also hired other musicians to play my music, and I've played their music. So, okay, so let's go on to primary income source. So largest category that musicians reported being their primary income source came from freelance, independent gigs, recording sessions, side person work, private teaching, or touring. And then we have 28% reported that they had some kind of other day job or a non-music job for their primary income. Less than 5% reported their primary source of income coming from union contracts or Broadway gigs. And I think this is a really huge indicator about how many, you know, in terms of what a musician's union, what a union can do for its constituents, and the representation of, you know, how much work is there, and how often do those rates, like union rates and contracts, are supposed to be fair pay, but the actual reality is that so few of us have access to an actual union gig. And of course, there are talks on the with the AFM right now negotiating private, the film and composers rights regarding creative AI, and how streaming giants are whittling away at union contracts for musicians, which, you know, we can get into later too. But that's a huge issue. So anyway, this one, I think this question is really important. It just gives some really key indicators. I like this data right here, that less than 2% of us have a primary income from royalties and residuals, which is promising in that it is nice to see that some people have royalties and residuals as a primary source of income. But it's really, like, you know, a fraction, tiny fraction. We got 1.8%. So, and then we have some people reported pension, Social Security, and then less than 3% over here identified some other type of income. And so, yeah, and yeah, bear in mind, you can kind of cross compare this with the age bracket and demonstration too. So it can kind of give you an idea of, you know, what life might be like as a musician from, you know, through each decade or age range. Okay, let's keep going here. So we have number of how much music do musicians release? So the question was, how many original albums or singles have musicians released? 30% reported over 10 combined original albums or singles. 1 to 3, about 27% reported having released 1 to 3 albums or singles. And then again, here you can see a large number reported 4 to 6. And then here we have 6% reported releasing about 7 to 9. And then we have a category here of 5%, 5.4% saying they haven't released anything and they don't plan on releasing their own music. So that's about 5%, if you, you know, kind of interesting to think about that. And then some people, we've got a small category of 8% saying that they haven't released anything, but they want to release something. So in general, you can kind of infer that about 95% of musicians want to release their own music and 5% don't plan on releasing their own music or don't want to release their own music. Okay, so, all right, how's everybody feeling? Is this okay? Am I moving too fast? Am I moving too slow? No, keep going. Okay, all right. All right, so here we go. All right, so this section, all right, let's talk about well-being. Okay, so this is kind of a interesting part of researching well-being in psychology, that well-being is not just not being sick, right? It's actually, are you living a fulfilled life in all the categories of life? And there's a positive psychology researcher named Martin Seligman, who I believe heads the department at, I think, UPenn, in psychology, called it positive psychology. And positive psychology research is, he invented this model of how to research well-being, and it's called the PERMA model. So PERMA stands for, so P-E-R-M-A, it's 5 categories of how to measure your well-being in life. And I just think this is an interesting thing in general. But so P stands for positive emotions, or, you know, are you feeling joy, happy, or sad? So literally your kind of emotional state in real time, and that might be measured over a variety of ways. You know, it could be like day to day, could be minute to minute, could be, you know, the moment you report on the survey at present, you're not really having a great time, so you're going to check like the box, like, no, not very happy right now, or whatever. But so that's kind of the general category of P, is for emotional state. So positive emotions or negative emotions. E stands for engagement or flow state. So researchers have discovered that we are in the most optimal state when we are in a flow and when we're doing something in a flow state. And this was actually coined by a 1970s researcher named Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who stole the term from jazz musicians. So being in a flow state is, right, being in flow. We know about this, we're improvisers. And so, but this could apply to anything. So if you're working or typing or writing and you're in a flow, or you're painting, you're in a flow. This is one of the strongest categories of well-being, that you are, this is the most optimal state you could be in. So this is satisfying. So that's E, is for engagement or flow state. The third is R, is for relationships. You know, it's all important that we feel loved and cared for. So relationships matter to our well-being. And that's pretty much straightforward with R for relationships. Then we have M, which stands for meaning, meaning like, do you have a meaningful purpose? So that's pretty much the M category. And then A, lastly, stands for accomplishment. So the reasons accomplishment is a category is because a lot of people get internal satisfaction when they accomplish something. So in general, I can just say in sum that on the PERMA scale, there's a difference between classical musicians and jazz musicians. For example, classical musicians reported greater satisfaction in their life in the M and A categories, so meaning, purpose, and accomplishment, whereas jazz musicians reported greater satisfaction in areas of engagement and relationships, so flow state and relationships or social relationships, which kind of makes sense because improvisation and jazz exists in communities and is a social music. So so anyway, so on with the questions here, we have is how people answered the question. In general, to what extent do you feel you lead a meaningful and purposeful life? Always, often, somewhat, a little, never. And so you can kind of see that there is a positive, largest receptive arc in always and often are the largest categories. So it's really positive. And next we have, in general, to what extent do you feel your life is worthwhile and valuable? These questions, oh boy, who wrote this? Okay, so we have largest categories in most people reporting positive indicators on this scale. And next we have, in general, how often do you feel positive in general? And you can see a breakdown. It's kind of even scale here. We have a little, somewhat, often, and then a very small percent of people said completely, only about 2.7%. So, but the largest categories being mostly somewhat positive and feeling often positive. And, you know, about a quarter of people reported they feel little positive. So, like a little often. So, okay, next, in general, how often do you feel sad? So, New York City jazz musicians reported only 1.8% said they never feel sad. About 19% said a little sad. 45% said somewhat sad. And then 27% they often feel sad, and about 7.27% said always, all the time. So again, we kind of have a even breakdown here. This is the sad frequency. Okay, so all right, we are on to question number 10. Here we go. So how often in the past 2 weeks have you felt positive emotions while improvising? So, okay, this is kind of the fun part of the survey, is actually surveying musicians about how they feel about playing music. So we have largely, most people report they often feel positive, or almost all the time feel positive while playing music, and that's fantastic. Over here, we do have some people reporting they never feel positive emotions while improvising, and some people reported a little bit, about 5%, and then we have I think all in all, this is about a quarter of people are not like overwhelmingly reporting positive emotions while improvising. So I thought that was important to note that, you know, sometimes we wear an identity as a musician on our sleeve. We tell everybody we're a musician, and we're always expected, you know, we do our passion, but that doesn't, I wanted this question to sort of reflect that it doesn't necessarily mean everybody is always, you know, happy while even they're doing their passion or playing music. So, yeah, I just hope that's sort of reflected, and I hope you can take something from that. Okay, so next we have, how often in the past 2 weeks did musicians report feeling negative emotions while improvising? And so this is sort of an interesting breakdown here, where a couple people, almost 3%, reported they always felt negative emotions while improvising. And 7% said they often feel negative emotions while improvising. About 20% reported they sometimes feel negative emotions while improvising. And then we have the majority of jazz musicians, almost 50%. We've got about 47% reporting they a little bit feel negative emotions while improvising, and 22.73% said they never feel negative emotions while improvising. So, of course, you know, you might criticize the design of the question or the survey or exactly what this might infer, but it's just a good baseline reference point, since this is basically, I'm just starting out with surveying musicians. So, okay. All right. We are almost at the end of time. We've made it to 11 questions. I could go on, or I could stop here and maybe we could discuss what we've, let's see, talked about thus far. So I welcome you all to chime in and ask any questions, and don't be shy, just unmute and say hello. No pressure. But yeah, I do just want to get sort of a vibe check on yeah, how any of this is landing, or if there's any kind of reaction so far.
Maybe I'll go first if no one else is gonna talk. Thank you so much for presenting all of that. It's all really super interesting. And thank you for doing this class. This is so cool. I guess the thing that stuck out to me of those graphs was people reporting like positive emotions versus feeling sad, and kind of how it almost didn't seem like the same group of people being surveyed, because like both of those were kind of, unless I'm making a mistake, like leaning towards mostly feeling positive or mostly feeling sad. So it's kind of like, how can that be the same group of people? Or maybe it's just like a tendency in terms of like taking a survey and kind of like like answering just like more of whatever the question is. I don't know. So yeah, that was just kind of, I'm just kind of thinking out loud. So I'm wondering how you interpreted that part.
Thank you. So that's a great question. I think it's ultimately in survey design, there's a lot of just basic issues like this, and you have to kind of think that the participant or the person taking it just really kind of wants to check a box and get it done and get it over with. The main idea that the more questions you ask, the less respondents you're going to actually get. So it was a challenge to kind of actually, originally I wanted to ask 50 questions, but
for sure,
my advisors wouldn't let me. They were like, no, 30 max. And so I kind of tapped out to combine questions so that I could get the most data as possible. But with these two examples, right, the negative emotions, the positive emotions, so it might, show you could infer like there's two different respondents, but it's kind of the same thing. If I ask you, are you enjoying improvising this solo? Or like in the last 2 weeks, have you enjoyed this? Okay, in the last 2 weeks, has it been negative? In the last 2 weeks, has it been positive? And so people could report, it's just weird to actually, it's kind of the same question, but designed a little bit differently. So it might not be, it might be an issue of like question design.
Yeah. No, I'm not super familiar with how people create surveys, but I think that's super interesting. And I could totally see it being like, yeah, I feel positive, I feel negative, like I feel both things like a lot. So I could also just see people answering like honestly, and it sort of being both. But yeah. Thank you.
And I'm curious what everybody thought about these questions, and did it register anything for you? I've sort of found it's helpful to just see like a breakdown of like how other musicians are feeling about this question, and then I can kind of like bounce off my own internal dialogue on things.
I was really happy to see people reporting meaningful experiences, feeling a meaningful purpose. And I forget which graph that was, but almost in spite of the income layout. But then in contrast to that, also, like there's a significant number of people coming back saying that they're having, it seems like they're having a range of emotion with the improvising question. Is that the feeling positive or negative? But overall, everyone is still reporting feeling fulfilled on some level. That was kind of an interesting with the data.
Yeah, it's interesting because there was kind of an overall body of research to suggest that musicians have the highest job satisfaction rate out of any category of labor, but and we'll get later to the survey, they also have the highest rates of anxiety and depression. So it's both things can, you know, coexist. Yeah, and that gets into like later in the survey. Yeah, which I guess we'll have to save for next week. I only planned 45 minutes. Now I know I'm gonna need more time. So let's see. Lastly, what could let's see, is there any other thoughts about income? The income one just sort of blew my mind. I was like, what? How are we living on, you know?
Yeah, I know we're, oh, wait, did I interrupt you?
No, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I know we're nearing the end here, but I'll jump in. Yeah, I appreciate your work. This is a, you know, an area that needs so much research, and just appreciate your linking, you know, the relationship between well-being and finances. And I feel like you know, part of the reason is, you know, that we don't have more coherent, you know, labor movements is because everything just is so scattered, and there's like the opacity and chaos of the industry, and then there's like beliefs that we hold to, you know, both categories that have potential for change. But you know, breaking these down in numbers is super helpful, and feel like, you know, a way to help, you know, move things forward.
Yeah, definitely. You know, I'm still like, every time I look at these graphs, I'm like, oh my God, you know, the public really has no idea how much it takes to you have to spend 10,000 hours at your instrument just to, you know, sort of get in the gate on playing an instrument, and then all of those hours are unpaid. And then there's all these other systemic issues of payment to musicians now that are increasing since the pandemic. And you know, I think these pieces of information here to survey freelance workers to understand like what the reality is I hope it's helpful. There's right, there's a book called by Jason Toynbee, sorry if this is blurry, Making Popular Music, which he really highlights how musicians have 20 times the labor nowadays than before social media and streaming. And there's a, let me see if I can share it in the chat, actually, an essay that I am sharing with just, you know, anyone who's interested. I'll drop that in the chat, but it basically, it's called The Labor That Dare Not Speak Its Name. And I wanted to just really kind of lean into the issues that musicians face, where we're all freelancing and doing a lot of work, and then maybe we feel like we can't actually articulate the struggles financially or psychologically that we're going through to each other, for the fear that we might lose a gig, or you know, for whatever variety of reasons. And actually, let me see if I can find that article and share it with you all. Hold on one second. Okay, yep. And I'm gonna share a couple articles here, just for everybody. It's not required reading, it's just for you all to enjoy. I try to share it because I have university library access, and these things are not available to the public. So I just wanted to kind of share this research, and I might even make like some kind of Dropbox for the class or salon if people are interested. Yeah, sounds like a thumbs up. Okay, maybe I'll do that, and I will send that to everybody's email. Okay, and other systemic issues. Here we go.
Sorry, I think I'm getting a login for the link.
You didn't get a login for?
I think I'm getting a login, like a login prompt to look at this, but maybe
Oh, really? Like you can't download the PDF from the chat? Okay, then I will email these PDFs to everybody. How does that sound? Yeah? Okay. And just to, okay. Yeah, I'll email this to everybody after class. I'll just okay, a couple more things I want to share. So this research is furthering the survey done in the UK in 2016. It's actually the largest survey of musicians ever conducted. It surveyed about 2,200 musicians in the UK. And that was done by Gross and Musgraves in 2016. And they wound up turning that data into a book called Can Music Make You Sick? And it's kind of the largest report on musicians in any country ever. And that study was really key in my courses. So this study is just to try to augment on that, but also focus on improvising musicians. So I will be sending that to everybody after class, and I just sent some links, maybe you can get it now. And then I also, I guess I'll touch on, I know we're over time, but let me also send this, this last article here called, it's authored by Reisman and Katz. It came out in 2020, and it is about the impact of COVID and Black Lives Matter on arts culture. And that's a really great article too, and we can get into that. And also, you know, feel free to email me, and, you know, if you have any thoughts after class, and, you know, things you want to focus on more, or something like that, or the format of class, or pacing or timing. I'm sort of an experiment, so I'm learning as I go. And so, but yeah, the Reisman and Katz study is pretty wild, because it just kind of surveys this overview that you know, like Charles Mingus was quoted as saying that when he started calling himself a jazz musician, his bank account like went to zero, and that was in the 50s. So not much has changed here, and so some people have, you know, kind of done research on you know, the scholarship on how why arts funding has not happened in the US. But the Reisman and Katz article really kind of breaks down this idea that since the 1950s and the Cold War era, it was really frowned upon. The idea of state-funded arts and radio was frowned upon, because they would consider that to be called undemocratic. So if the state was funding public radio and the state was funding arts, it sort of, you know, created a conflict with the idea of communism. So, or it's just that the US has sold this idea and branded freedom of speech as, you know, everybody can have it, but you're not going to get paid. So there's different schools of thought, and I'm wondering what everybody how thinks about that. But the Reisman and Katz really breaks it down, how you know, we really haven't had state-funded arts since the WPA program, FDR's New Deal in the 30s. And then there was a law change in 1947 in New York that impacted how musicians got paid at venues. And flash forward through the 60s with the formation of broadcast radio in the States, through the 90s, when we had Robert Mapplethorpe, the artist, demonized in Congress for his art being sort of demonized by Republicans as pornographic, to have you know, nudes in art. And therefore that sort of tactic you know, sort of shifted the ability of arts funding to not be polarized in bicameral legislation. So, and now we have the NEA today, which gets annually about 150 million in federal funding, but that's less than 1% of the total arts budget that generates a $26 to $30 billion economy. And so you know, which is, as we know, is not getting back to the artists. So due to big tech streaming starvation wages and things like that. So yeah, the Wrightsman and Katz and the Brittany, so the arts economy annually is 26 to 30 billion in generation per year. And I think that's quoted from like 2020, it might be like early pandemic or pre-pandemic times. And there's the Julia Lowell book in the chat is she's a wonderful researcher, and this book came out in 2008, and she talks about state-funded arts agencies. So when you think about how the federal funding is 150 million out of a $30 billion economy, 150 million a year federal funding, think about that. If it goes to 50 states, that's maybe 3 million per state. And that gets funneled into the state arts councils like NYSCA, which then goes to NYFA in the form of competitive grants for artists. And so Julia Lowell's book surveys how the state arts agencies operate. And there's actually some funny, interesting research on artists in New Jersey, like how many artists are in New Jersey were aware that there was a New Jersey State Council for the Arts, and the answer was like less than 5% or something. And of the New Jersey artists that actually knew that there was a state arts council, most of them said, I'm not really interested in applying for grants with this council because they never give me money, or I don't like what they have to offer, or the grant doesn't actually do anything for what I'm trying to do. And I think we can all relate to that. So it's just kind of a big meta, you know, it's a bit of a crack up. But so yeah, just thinking about sort of that flow of the federal funding to the state funding, and then the grants and sort of nonprofit sector versus the public and private sector, and then the other pieces of the pie where you have you know, people with opinions on should tax dollars fund art, and if so, who and why. And so there's a funny research article it's just called like My Tax Dollars Paid for That, you know, and it's a survey of, you know, like arts funding and public response. So that's another interesting part of the puzzle too, that artists have to deal with how their art is funded, whether public or private, and censorship, and that's a whole other category. But so yeah, but y'all, thank you so much for joining. I am just really grateful that you found this meeting and joined and took the time to be here. And yeah, welcome for more discussion. And I know we're over time, but it's lovely to have you here. So yeah, any other thoughts? Just
well presented. And thank you
Thank you
much.
so much for the information. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Brittany. This is awesome.
The work that you're doing. This is really cool.
thank
See you
you.
next week.
Thank you. Yeah. All right, y'all. Well, thank you so much. Yeah. Okay, well, so I think, yeah, we'll continue next week. I'll keep presenting. I think we were on question 11, so I guess we'll take it from question 11, 12, and then we can go on. And yeah, I'm looking forward to your thoughts and questions and seeing you over the next couple weeks.
Oh, y'all.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
All right, y'all, thanks for tuning in. Okay, I'll see you next week. Thanks, Brittany.
Bye, Brittany. Thank you.
Bye, Brittany. Thanks, cheers. Bye.